The evening was alive with excitement, the kind that makes the air feel heavier than usual. The music hall was packed, the seats filled with people who had paid generously to witness talent and skill. There was a sense of expectation buzzing in the room, a feeling that tonight would showcase something remarkable. Most of the guests were dressed in fine clothes, talking in soft murmurs about the performers, their eyes shining with anticipation. The chandeliers above scattered light in warm patterns across the polished wooden floor, making the hall feel grand and almost magical. Backstage, hidden behind the heavy curtains, a woman stood quietly in the corner. Her clothes were simple, her shoes worn but clean, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her sheet music. Unlike the other performers, she had no one to introduce her or to speak about her achievements. She was a stranger to this world of prestige, a person who had spent her life learning and practicing without the comfort of recognition. She had worked hard every day for the music she loved, not for applause or fame. Yet tonight she was here, ready to step onto the stage and let her fingers tell the story she had carried in her heart for so long. She glanced around at the other performers preparing for their moments. Some were stretching their fingers, others were reviewing notes or speaking softly with their mentors. Each seemed confident, accustomed to being noticed, used to the idea that their talent would earn attention automatically. She could not help but feel a little out of place. She was different from them, and she knew that anyone looking at her would likely underestimate her abilities. The whispers of the backstage crew did not help. They spoke in hushed tones, clearly not expecting much from someone so plainly dressed, someone so quiet. Her thoughts drifted to her journey here. She had grown up in a small neighborhood, where music was a companion but not a path to glory. She had learned to play on a slightly battered piano, in a room that smelled of old wood and sunlight. Every morning she would practice for hours, letting the notes fill the quiet corners of her home. People around her had often told her to focus on more practical things, suggesting jobs and tasks that would earn money. But she had persisted. Music was not just a hobby. It was her voice, her way of speaking when words felt insufficient. It was the one constant in her life, and she had carried it with patience and care even when no one seemed to notice. As she stood backstage, the sounds of the hall reached her ears. Applause erupted for another performer, confident and polished, their performance flawless but lacking a certain depth she knew she could provide. She felt a pang of nervousness, wondering if she would ever be able to reach the expectations of this audience. But then she reminded herself of why she had come. She had come to share her music, to let it speak for her. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm wash over her. The notes she would play were not just notes. They were pieces of her life, each one carrying her emotions, her struggles, and her quiet victories. The stage manager called her name softly, a reminder that it was time. She walked forward, her steps measured and careful, aware of the eyes that now glanced her way. Some looked indifferent, others curious, and a few wore expressions that seemed to say, "Who is she, and why is she here?" She ignored them all. Every step toward the piano was a step into a world she had known intimately, a world where judgment mattered less than the truth of the music. She reached the piano, her fingers brushing the polished keys, feeling the familiar coolness under her touch. The sheet music lay in front of her, but she hardly needed it. The pieces were etched in her memory, each one a story she had lived. The audience settled, the chatter fading as they prepared for another performance. The maestro, a man of sharp features and an even sharper reputation, watched her closely from the front of the hall. He had seen countless musicians, evaluated them with exacting standards, and often reserved praise for those who already had recognition. He barely gave her a nod, a polite acknowledgement, but there was a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. To him, she was just another hopeful, someone who would likely be forgotten after the night was over. Yet she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a quiet determination, a knowledge that what she was about to play could not be measured by appearances or assumptions. As she positioned herself on the bench, she allowed her mind to quiet. The lights above bathed the piano in a soft glow, the perfect stage for her to bring her music to life. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the memories of her practice sessions, her late nights, and her mornings filled with music settle within her. She thought of the encouragement from her parents, the lessons from her early teachers, and the small victories that had kept her going, even when recognition seemed distant. Each memory was a note, each feeling a chord, ready to resonate through her fingers and into the hall. The audience waited, some still unsure of what to expect. A few whispers questioned why someone so seemingly modest was given a moment on this prestigious stage. She ignored them all. The piano, her old companion, seemed to recognize her touch, the keys responding with a gentle familiarity that settled her nerves. She straightened her back, lifted her hands, and prepared to play. She did not think about impressing anyone, nor did she think about applause or validation. In that moment, it was just her and the music, a conversation that needed no words, no judgment, only expression. She pressed the first key. The sound that emerged was clear, pure, and unexpectedly strong. It filled the hall, carrying a warmth and depth that immediately caught the attention of everyone present. The audience, expecting something ordinary, found themselves leaning forward, captivated. The maestro paused, his skepticism faltering as he listened intently. There was a subtle shift in the room, an unspoken acknowledgement that this performance was different, that this musician, though overlooked, held something rare. She continued, her fingers moving with grace and precision, each note flowing naturally, telling a story without words. The emotions she had held inside for years found their way into the music, expressing joy, sorrow, hope, and resilience. Every listener felt it in their own way, drawn into the narrative she had woven through sound. The applause that had erupted for previous performers was replaced with silence, a reverent stillness that spoke louder than any noise. In that quiet, she found the freedom to express herself fully, and the hall seemed to listen, suspended in the moment of her talent. Even as she played, she remained grounded, aware of her own journey and the effort it had taken to arrive here. She did not allow herself to be swept away by the reactions around her. Her focus remained on the music, on the story she wanted to tell. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional, creating a rhythm that was both personal and universal. She could feel the eyes of the audience, the unspoken judgments and curiosity, but she let them pass, letting the music carry its own truth. Backstage, those who had once doubted her watched with growing surprise. Crew members exchanged glances, whispering about the unexpected beauty of her performance. Fellow performers who had once seen her as insignificant could not hide their admiration. They watched, realizing that someone so humble, so quietly persistent could command the attention of an entire hall with nothing but dedication and talent. The realization began to sink in that appearances, background, and expectations meant little in the face of genuine artistry. The first part of her performance ended, and a soft murmur of appreciation rose from the audience. It was not yet a full applause, but there was a tangible recognition that something remarkable had begun. The maestro remained seated, his eyes fixed on her, now fully attentive. There was a respect forming, unspoken but evident, as he realized that his initial assumptions were wrong. He had underestimated her, as had many others, but the music had spoken for itself, breaking through the layers of doubt and expectation. She took a brief pause, her fingers hovering above the keys. Feeling the resonance of the first piece linger in the hall, she allowed herself a quiet smile, knowing that the hardest part had been stepping onto the stage, confronting skepticism, and trusting in her own preparation and passion. The journey that had led her here, full of persistence, patience, and love for music, was paying off in a subtle but profound way. She felt a surge of quiet triumph, not for recognition, but for having honored her own commitment to her art. As she prepared for the next section of her performance, the room seemed transformed. The initial judgment had melted into curiosity and anticipation. People who had glanced at her with indifference now leaned forward, eager to hear the next note, to experience the unfolding story that her music promised. She felt a connection with the audience, an unspoken understanding that her music was not just for her, but for them as well, to touch, to move, and to inspire. The first part of the evening ended with a subtle acknowledgement from the audience, a quiet promise of the impact that was yet to come. The humble woman had taken her first steps into a world that had largely ignored her, and in doing so had begun to reveal the depth of her talent. She had shown that courage, dedication, and passion could create moments of beauty that transcended expectations, and that even the quietest presence could leave a lasting impression. As she looked out into the audience, she saw the flicker of surprise, the curiosity, and the slowly growing respect. and she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey on this stage. The woman felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere as she prepared for her next piece. The hall had changed in tone. The audience no longer carried the casual expectation of being entertained by ordinary skill. Instead, a quiet anticipation filled the air, a sense that something meaningful was about to unfold. The chandeliers reflected soft patterns on the polished floor, but the light seemed to dim in a way that focused all attention on her and the piano. She sat upright on the bench, her fingers poised above the keys, feeling the familiar warmth of the instrument beneath her touch. As she began, the music emerged slowly, delicate yet confident. Every note seemed to carry a story, and the audience leaned forward, sensing the unfolding narrative. The room was silent except for the melody, each sound reaching into the hearts of the listeners. She played not to impress, but to convey the emotions that had built up over years of dedication and quiet practice. Her life, her struggles, and her small victories were woven into every chord and every pause. Backstage, some performers watched in awe, unable to hide the surprise that someone so humble could command the room with such presence. They whispered among themselves, sharing glances of disbelief. The woman had no grand gestures, no dramatic flair, only a quiet intensity that grew with every note. Her humility made the performance feel personal, as if she were sharing a piece of her soul with each person listening. It was impossible to ignore the depth of feeling in her playing. The maestro, who had been critical of others for minor imperfections, now sat rigid, fully attentive. His eyes were fixed on her, and his expression softened with each measure. He realized that her talent was not just technical skill, but a rare gift of expression. The kind of music she played carried emotion beyond the written notes, revealing a sensitivity and understanding that could not be taught. For the first time, he felt a mixture of admiration and surprise, acknowledging silently that this performance was extraordinary. As the woman continued, her fingers moved gracefully, guiding the melody through highs and lows, tension and release. Each note seemed to tell a chapter of a story, and the audience responded unconsciously to the narrative. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned slightly forward, as though trying to catch every nuance. The room was connected in a rare moment of shared attention, where every heart seemed to beat along with the music. She could feel it too, a silent exchange between her and the listeners, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. She allowed herself brief moments to pause, creating tension and anticipation, letting the music breathe. Her training had taught her discipline, but her instinct guided her in ways that no sheet music could capture. The performance became a conversation, a dialogue between her and every person in the hall. It was not just sound. It was emotion made visible through melody and rhythm. She felt every listener, every reaction, and yet she remained immersed in her own world of music. This balance between self-expression and connection was the magic she had always hoped to create. The audience began to respond more openly, subtle movements that betrayed their growing admiration. A few leaned closer in their seats. Some exchanged glances of astonishment, and a soft sigh of appreciation escaped from more than one person. Even the critics, usually reserved and precise, leaned forward, pens in hand, their eyes wide with recognition. They realized that what they were witnessing was not just a good performance, but a rare, transformative experience. The woman, who had once been overlooked, was now the center of attention, not by force or appearance, but by the undeniable power of her artistry. She continued through the piece, her emotions flowing freely yet controlled with care. Every chord and cadence reflected her life's journey. The quiet mornings practicing alone, the struggles with doubt, and the determination to pursue her passion despite obstacles. She did not need to speak. The music said everything, and as she played, the audience felt the honesty in every note. The truth of a story lived and endured. The simplicity of her presence contrasted sharply with the intensity of her skill, creating a tension that made each moment of the performance unforgettable. Backstage, those who had once underestimated her now watched with newfound respect. The whispers of doubt were replaced by admiration and curiosity. Some performers, feeling humbled, adjusted their own expectations of what talent could look like. Crew members shook their heads slightly, muttering about the unexpected brilliance that had appeared in their midst. It was a quiet revolution of perception, one person breaking through assumptions simply by being authentic and devoted to her craft. The woman played with a serene focus, almost as if the hall itself had become an extension of her being. She allowed the music to flow naturally, guided by instinct and emotion rather than thought or expectation. The audience, too, seemed to lose track of time, suspended in the unfolding melody. Each note resonated with clarity, filling the room and creating a sense of shared experience. People felt as if they were witnessing something intimate, something meant for them personally, even in a crowd of strangers. The maestro, who had rarely been moved so openly by a performance, now allowed himself a slight smile. He understood that the woman was not simply talented but exceptional. Her humility, the quiet way she had prepared, and the depth of her expression created a powerful combination. It was a lesson for him and for everyone present. Greatness often comes quietly without fanfare and can surprise even the most experienced observers. He felt a mix of pride and humility, knowing that his initial assumptions had been entirely wrong. As the piece progressed, the woman felt a growing connection to the audience. Their reactions, subtle yet unmistakable, encouraged her to explore the music further. She experimented with gentle variations, letting emotion guide her hands in ways that were unexpected even to her. The audience responded, the room vibrating with an unspoken energy that tied everyone together. In those moments, there was no stage, no hierarchy, no judgment, only music and shared feeling. The experience transcended performance. It became a communion of hearts. The performance reached its climax with a series of cascading notes, each one carrying intensity and passion. The woman's hands moved with precision and grace, every motion purposeful yet natural. The hall seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the unfolding soundscape. The crescendo was both thrilling and moving, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. When the final note rang out, it lingered in the silence, echoing long after her fingers had left the keys. The room remained quiet for a moment, as if no one could yet bring themselves to break the spell. Then slowly, applause began to ripple through the hall. It started with a few tentative claps, then grew steadily into a strong, unanimous recognition of the woman's talent. People rose from their seats, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of pure amazement. The applause was heartfelt, not perfunctory, and it carried a depth of admiration that spoke volumes. The woman, breathing steadily, allowed herself a small, humble smile. She knew this was more than recognition. It was a validation of years of dedication, patience, and love for music. Backstage, the energy had changed entirely. Those who had doubted her now spoke in tones of respect and wonder. The other performers were quiet, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Even the hall staff seemed caught in the ripple of admiration, feeling the power of a humble presence transforming an entire room. The woman had broken through preconceived notions not by ambition or spectacle, but simply by being true to herself and her craft. It was a moment that would linger in the memories of everyone present. The maestro, finally standing, approached her with deliberate steps. He extended a hand, his eyes full of respect and acknowledgement. For the first time, he spoke words of admiration, praising her skill, expression, and dedication. It was not just a compliment. It was recognition from someone who had seen countless musicians and understood the true depth of artistry. The woman accepted his words with quiet gratitude, not boastfulness, understanding that this was a moment of connection and acknowledgement, rather than mere praise. As the audience continued to applaud, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was not the clapping that mattered most, but the awareness that her music had touched people, that it had communicated something authentic and human. The room had shifted in tone, from skepticism and expectation to admiration and emotional engagement. She had entered a world that had once ignored her and had, through her talent and sincerity, transformed it. The experience reaffirmed her belief that perseverance, passion, and authenticity could break through even the most rigid boundaries of judgment. The woman left the stage for a brief moment, stepping into the shadows of the backstage area, yet feeling the warmth of the applause still resonating in her chest. She allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The years of quiet practice, the challenges she had faced, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. It was a reminder that true growth and recognition often come to those who continue despite being unseen, who dedicate themselves to what they love without expectation of reward. Her performance had proven that even a humble presence could create a lasting impact. In that quiet backstage moment, she realized that the night was far from over. The first part of her performance had broken through the initial barriers of doubt and expectation. Now she had the opportunity to build on that connection, to explore deeper layers of expression, and to share more of her story through music. The anticipation of the next piece filled her with excitement and calm determination. She knew that whatever happened next, she had already made her mark in a way that could not be forgotten. As she returned to the piano for the next segment, the audience's focus sharpened again. The hall was ready, no longer expecting a simple performance but something that would leave a lasting impression. The woman sat, adjusted her posture, and let her fingers hover over the keys. She felt the familiar thrill of possibility and the quiet reassurance of her own skill. Each note would continue the conversation she had begun, each melody a reflection of her heart and the life she had lived. She was ready not for recognition alone, but for the pure act of sharing her music, letting it reach every soul in the hall. The woman sat quietly at the piano, feeling the weight of the room's attention settle around her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, calm, yet eager, as if the instrument itself was waiting for her to begin. The applause for her earlier performance had not yet faded from the minds of the audience. People were leaning forward, anticipating what would come next. They had witnessed something extraordinary, and now the expectation was no longer doubt but genuine curiosity and excitement. She allowed herself a brief moment to inhale deeply, centering herself. Every performance required a connection to the music, but tonight was different. Tonight, the connection had to reach beyond notes and rhythm. It had to reach the hearts of those listening. She closed her eyes and remembered the long hours of practice, the countless mornings when she had played alone, imagining an audience she could only dream of. Those moments had shaped her, made her stronger, and brought her to this stage. She let that quiet strength fill her chest and guide her hands. The first notes she played were soft, almost whisper-like, but they carried a depth that drew the audience in immediately. Each sound was deliberate, full of emotion, telling stories without words. The hall seemed to lean closer with every phrase, as if holding its breath. She was aware of the maestro watching intently, and she felt no pressure from him, only a silent recognition of her abilities. It was a rare feeling, being seen for who she truly was and what she could express. As the music progressed, she allowed herself to explore deeper layers of sound. Her fingers danced across the keys, sometimes delicate, sometimes forceful, expressing joy, sorrow, and longing. The melody flowed seamlessly, guided by instinct, emotion, and years of disciplined practice. Every note was an extension of herself, a bridge from her heart to the audience. She could sense their reactions. Some eyes were closed, some faces were soft with emotion, some leaned forward, captivated. The room was fully alive with shared experience. The woman's expression remained calm, almost serene, but inside a quiet fire burned. This was her chance to show not only her skill, but the depth of her passion. She knew that true music came from more than technique. It came from life experience, from emotion, from being honest and vulnerable. Each chord she played was a reflection of her journey, the struggles, the persistence, the quiet victories that had defined her. Every listener could feel it, whether they understood the story or simply responded to the beauty of the sound. Backstage, the other performers watched with a mixture of admiration and awe. They had expected an ordinary recital, but the woman's performance was anything but ordinary. She had a presence that demanded attention without demanding it, a subtle authority that came from mastery and sincerity. The whispers that had once been dismissive had vanished, replaced with awe and recognition. They could see now that talent did not need grandeur to shine. Sometimes it came quietly, unexpectedly, and completely transformed a room. The maestro, who had initially greeted her performance with polite skepticism, now sat completely absorbed. His eyes followed every movement of her hands, every nuance in her expression. He had seen countless musicians over the years, but very few had ever managed to move him so deeply. There was an understanding forming within him that this performance was more than just notes. It was art in its purest form. He realized that the woman had something rare, a gift that could touch people on a profound level, and he felt a mixture of pride and humility in witnessing it. The music swelled and receded, moving through moments of tension and release. The audience felt every change, every shift in tone, as if the music was speaking directly to each person. Some felt tears welling in their eyes. Some felt their hearts lift, some simply sat in awe, captivated by the purity of expression. There was a connection between the performer and the listeners that transcended words. It was as though the piano, the woman, and the audience were all part of a single organism, breathing together, living together through sound. She played with a focus that made her seem almost detached from the world around her, yet entirely connected to it. She had learned to trust the music, to trust her instincts, and to let the emotions guide her hands. Her performance was not just about impressing the audience. It was about revealing a part of herself, a truth she had carried in silence for so long. The beauty of the moment lay in its honesty, the ability to communicate without words, to move without trying, to reach hearts without demand. In the middle of the piece, she introduced a subtle variation, a twist that was unexpected yet perfectly fitting. The audience reacted immediately, leaning closer, listening more intently. Even the most experienced musicians among them recognized the brilliance of the move. It was not just skill, it was intuition, creativity, and courage all wrapped together. The woman had taken control of the room without arrogance, guiding the listeners through a journey they had not anticipated, but now could not imagine leaving. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the music entered a quiet, introspective phase. She allowed silence to play as much a role as sound, giving weight to every pause. The audience felt the depth of the silence, the spaces between the notes carrying emotion almost as strongly as the notes themselves. It was a delicate balance, a dance between sound and absence, and she executed it flawlessly. Every listener was captivated, sensing the unspoken stories woven into the music, understanding that this performance was as much about feeling as it was about technique. Backstage, the whispers of admiration continued. Crew members shook their heads slightly, marveling at her control and the emotional power she held. Other performers watched with respect and a touch of envy, realizing that her humility did not limit her impact but enhanced it. They saw that true mastery was not always loud or flashy, but could emerge quietly, leaving an unforgettable impression. The woman's dedication, her long years of practice, and her unwavering commitment to music had culminated in a moment that transcended expectations. The maestro's expression had softened further. He was no longer merely observing. He was experiencing the music alongside the audience. He had always valued technical skill and precision, but he now understood that emotional resonance could be just as powerful, if not more so. He felt a rare sense of wonder and pride, recognizing that the woman's performance had achieved something extraordinary. For a man accustomed to evaluating and judging, it was a humbling experience to witness talent that could not be measured in conventional ways. The woman's playing grew in intensity, moving through faster passages and dynamic shifts with ease. Each note was deliberate, each phrase carefully crafted yet natural. She allowed herself to feel the music fully, letting the emotional undercurrent guide her hands. The audience responded instinctively, swept up in the ebb and flow of the performance. The connection deepened and the hall became a shared space of experience, where every heartbeat and breath seemed to echo the rhythm of the music. She maintained a quiet focus throughout, never seeking attention, never allowing ego to intrude. Her humility was part of the magic, allowing the music itself to shine without distraction. People who had initially doubted her presence now watched in awe, recognizing that her strength lay not in showmanship, but in authenticity. Every gesture, every note, every pause was imbued with sincerity, creating a performance that felt deeply personal yet universally moving. As the piece approached its conclusion, she slowed the tempo slightly, drawing out the final phrases with careful attention. The hall held its breath, sensing the impending resolution. Her hands moved with grace and control, each chord resonating with clarity and emotion. The music seemed to linger, refusing to leave the room too quickly, as if reluctant to end such a perfect moment. The audience, too, was reluctant, caught in the spell of the performance, experiencing a rare sense of time suspended. Finally, the last note rang out, pure and resonant. It hung in the air, filling every corner of the hall, and then faded gently, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The audience remained still for a heartbeat, absorbing the impact of what they had just witnessed. Then gradually applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a powerful wave of appreciation. People rose to their feet, some clapping with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of amazement. The woman allowed herself a quiet smile, acknowledging the response with humility and gratitude. Backstage, the energy had transformed completely. Those who had once doubted her now spoke in tones of admiration, reflecting on the unexpected brilliance of her performance. Other performers quietly nodded in respect, recognizing the depth of skill and emotional power she had displayed. The crew members, too, felt the ripple of impact, marveling at the way a humble presence had transformed an entire room. The woman had broken through assumptions not by seeking recognition, but by remaining true to herself and her music. The maestro finally stood, approaching her with measured steps. He extended a hand, his eyes filled with genuine respect and acknowledgement. His words, spoken quietly but with conviction, praised her talent, her expression, and her dedication. It was more than a compliment. It was validation from someone who had seen countless musicians and understood the rarity of what he had just witnessed. The woman accepted the recognition with quiet dignity, understanding that this moment was about connection, art, and the power of authenticity. As she stepped away from the piano briefly, she allowed herself a moment to breathe and reflect. The audience's reaction, the maestro's acknowledgement, and the backstage admiration were all affirmations of her journey. The countless hours of practice and the quiet persistence that had brought her here. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause. It was the understanding that her music had reached people, that her story, told through notes and emotion, had been heard and felt. She returned to the piano for the next segment, ready to continue sharing her gift. The audience was fully attentive, no longer merely watching a performance but experiencing it. She felt the connection, the shared understanding, and the silent communication that music could create. Each note, each pause, each phrase became a conversation, a bridge between her world and the hearts of the listeners. In that space, she was not just a performer. She was a storyteller, an artist, and a messenger of emotion. The third part of her performance had set a new standard, and she was ready to take it even further, exploring deeper emotions and creating moments that would linger long after the final note had been played. The woman settled back at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the vibrations of the room's energy as she prepared for the next piece. The audience had become completely engaged, their anticipation quiet but palpable. She could feel the collective attention in the air, a silent invitation to continue the journey she had begun. Her heart remained steady, her mind clear, as she prepared to play a piece that was both familiar and deeply personal, one that carried the essence of her experiences, her struggles and her triumphs. The first notes came softly, almost like a gentle breeze, delicate but filled with meaning. She allowed the music to flow naturally, guided by her memory and her emotions. Every key she pressed was intentional, each note crafted to communicate a story that could not be told with words alone. The audience leaned in, completely absorbed. There was no chatter, no distraction, only the sound of the piano and the emotions it carried. She felt a quiet thrill knowing that her music had the power to capture attention without force or demand. As the piece developed, the melody became more complex, intertwining moments of tension and release. Her fingers moved with confidence, yet there was a softness that made each note feel alive. The audience responded unconsciously to every nuance, their expressions shifting as they followed the emotional currents of the music. Some closed their eyes, feeling the story in their hearts. Others leaned forward, mesmerized by the beauty of the sound. Every individual seemed to experience the performance personally, even in the presence of so many people. Backstage, the other performers watched in silent admiration. They had witnessed her talent grow throughout the evening, but this piece revealed something deeper. It was not just technical skill or precision. It was the depth of feeling, the subtlety and the honesty that set her apart. They realized that her humility had not been a weakness but a strength, allowing the music to shine without distraction. Her performance was becoming a lesson in authenticity, an example of how true artistry could move people profoundly. The maestro, seated at the front, could not hide his awe. He had been critical of performers in the past, searching for flaws, but tonight there was nothing to critique. Each note resonated with intention and emotion, drawing him in. He realized that her music had a rare quality, a capacity to touch the listener's soul, and he felt both humbled and inspired. He understood that her skill went beyond what he had seen before. It was as if she had taken all the quiet moments of her life and channeled them into the piano, creating a world the audience could step into. The woman allowed herself to explore the dynamics of the piece fully. She varied the intensity, sometimes striking the keys with power, at other times caressing them gently. She created a sense of narrative, a journey through sound that mirrored the complexities of life. The audience responded instinctively, moved by the authenticity and depth of her expression. Their faces reflected wonder, empathy, and admiration. The room seemed alive, the energy between performer and listeners growing with every phrase. Her performance was a dance of contrasts, a mixture of strength and vulnerability. She played with precision but also allowed for moments of improvisation, letting the music breathe. The silence between phrases was as important as the notes themselves, giving weight and space to the emotions she conveyed. The audience was captivated, experiencing not just a recital but an emotional voyage. It was rare to witness such a combination of technical skill and expressive depth, and everyone in the hall felt it profoundly. Backstage, the whispers had turned into quiet conversations filled with admiration. Crew members and performers alike exchanged looks of disbelief and respect. They realized that her presence had transformed the recital, that her quiet determination and dedication had produced something extraordinary. She had taken a position of humility and turned it into a source of strength, captivating everyone in the room without a word, without a gesture beyond the music. The realization spread that true talent could arrive silently and still leave an indelible mark. The woman's hands glided over the keys, moving through a series of complex passages with ease and grace. She had memorized every note, yet she played with the freedom of someone completely in tune with the music. Her fingers seemed to move with an intelligence of their own, each motion purposeful and expressive. The audience was completely enraptured. Some leaned forward with eyes wide. Others sat in stillness, letting the sound wash over them. Every listener felt the emotional depth, the connection between the performer and the music, and through it, a connection to their own feelings. The maestro's face reflected a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had encountered many musicians, some technically brilliant, others expressive, but rarely both in perfect balance. He watched closely, recognizing the rare skill and emotional honesty that defined her performance. It was not just her technical command of the piano that impressed him, but the authenticity and human connection she brought to every phrase. He realized that he had underestimated her earlier, and now he understood that her humility was a part of her power. The music grew more intense, moving through a series of crescendos and delicate interludes. The woman's hands never faltered. Each note was carefully considered, yet played with fluidity. The audience felt a mixture of suspense and emotion, swept along with the journey she created. It was as if each chord and cadence told a chapter of a story they could feel but not articulate. They were fully present, caught in a shared experience that left them emotionally invested. The room vibrated with attention, energy, and wonder. She allowed herself moments to breathe, giving space for reflection and anticipation within the music. The pauses were meaningful, each one highlighting the emotional depth of the composition. The audience felt the weight of these silences, sensing the unspoken emotions that filled the spaces between notes. It was a masterful balance of sound and stillness, a technique that spoke to her years of practice, intuition, and understanding of the power of music. The experience was immersive, leaving the listeners profoundly moved. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. The other performers were silent, respecting the power of what they had witnessed. Crew members whispered about the beauty and skill of her playing, recognizing that this was a rare moment of artistry. She had taken a humble presence and turned it into something transformative. It was a reminder that talent could arrive in unexpected forms and leave a lasting impression, not through spectacle, but through authenticity, dedication, and connection.